Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Combat Zone, where the enemy only has 4 things to say: abandon ship, bail out, take cover, and we surrender. We've got quite the show lined up for you this evening. All kinds of things on the menu. Your two hosts here, Nick and Joe. I'm Nick. He's Joseph, and he's got a bit of a squawky squawk box tonight. So I'm going to try to shoulder a little bit more of the load so he doesn't stress his voice out.
A squawky squawk box.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm a little hoarse.
Yeah. Well,
still getting over a cold. You know, I never have these colds for really long periods of time, but for some reason, this one has really lingered on. You had a cold for a while too, if I recall correctly, Nick.
Well, I'm still fighting the occasional cough, but you just learn to. Excuse me.
Yeah, that's the same with me. It's just a little bit of a.
You struggle through it. You get through it.
It's just a little bit of a cough for me. Well, it's a lot of a cough. And so I have this congestion in my chest, and just it's taken quite a while to disappear. But I appreciate the thing about calling it my squawky squawk box is I've had people tell me that that's the way it is normally.
Yeah, but it's exceptionally squawky this week. Anyway, I just wanted to start the show off by talking about our little venture down to the... before I get to that. This Tuesday night, I went out and found a local Toastmasters chapter.
Oh, I thought that was the adventure we were going to talk about.
That's why I said...
Speaking of squawky squawk boxes.
Actually, it was a lot of fun.
I'll bet.
I love to speak. I love public speaking, and I have for quite a while. The largest crowd I ever spoke in front of were 6,000 people on the Hill when we did the fight against tradition, in support of the traditional marriage rally. God, is that 10 years ago?
It's more than 10 years ago, Nick.
I was on the radio, and they invited me to come and speak. So I did. And the first thing I did, I walked up to the podium, I looked out over that sea of faces and went, holy crap, that's what you guys look like. And everybody got a laugh, and I spoke for about 15 or 20 minutes. Maybe it seemed longer. I don't think it was quite that long. But I just have always enjoyed that. But it's a declining skill set. When you don't do it as often as you once did, it does take a little bit to bring it back. So I thought I'd knock the rust off and join Toastmasters. And I went down there, and there was about a dozen of us there, I guess. And it was a nice mix of men and women and a whole cross-section of, we had economists, we had bankers, we had government workers, we had some redneck from Killaloo was there. We just had a real diverse group. And it was a lot of fun. Now, if you're unfamiliar with Toastmasters, they have a formula they go through. I won't lay it all out, but you have 2 main speeches, and then you have what they call table talk. And everybody's there. So I was talking to my wife later about some of the comments that were made about the different speakers. And she says, what'd you do, go in there and just criticize them and be mean? I said, criticize, yes. Be mean, no. That's the whole point. You go up and you give a speech, and people point out what your weaknesses and what your strengths are. That's what Toastmasters is all about. Oh. And I don't go out of my way to be mean. I just only do that when people really annoy me, when they come off with really dumb ideas. But these people were very welcoming and warm, and it was a lot of fun. I had a great time down there at what was the name of it? The 320 Jason Russell Place or something like that.
I don't know.
Centertown, Ottawa, anyway. So
was it a commercial building or
no? It was a recreation. It was a city-owned facility,
right? That
they rent the room from.
Okay.
So anyway, they went down there, and Paul Harvey was the Toastmaster. Did a great job, and they had some really good, people who had been there a while. Were very, very gentle in their how do I put it?
Critiqueness.
Yes, that's it. In their critique. And uplifting in the things that they said.
Would you say that your presentation was critiquable?
Well, the only thing I spoke for about 2.5 minutes. They went. It was during the table talk segment because I wasn't scheduled to give a formal speech. Those ran about 6.5 minutes, which seems like a lifetime. It was the first time you do it, but they asked me to use a buzzword, and the buzzword I got was. Outside the box?
Outside the box.
Buzzword, yeah.
Well, that would be a buzz That would be kind of like a buzz phrase.
Yeah, okay. But they called it buzzword. But
right.
And the word of the night was scoop. So I talked about making feed with my dad and how you had to think outside the box on the farm, use the scoop shovel to feed the corn into the hammer mill. It's very there's certain words that we got used. All the other buzzwords had been used before. I tried everything I could to get them all in. There was only one I couldn't fit in. And at the end of the night, when they were critiquing me, they said they keep track of your ums, your ahs, and your filler words that are unnecessary.
I do that a lot.
A lot of people do.
No, but I do it more than most people.
Do you?
Yeah, if you ever listen to the broadcasts recordings, which I know you never do, Nick, because you hate listening to yourself on the radio.
I mean, I've already said it. I know what I said.
But it's a good way
It is.
to realize how often you and
How awful
ah
I sound.
And well, no, you don't sound awful, but you don't and ah as much as I and ah. So just let's stay on this Toastmasters thing for a minute, because I'm interested, Nick, and I'm sure some of our listeners are interested as well. What is it a large organization? It's national, it's international.
It is.
I think I've seen some competitions.
They do. They have national
international competitions. You can catch some of this stuff on live, not
YouTube.
live, but on YouTube.
Yep. And I watched one, and the guy was really very good. He walked out on stage, pulled out a cigarette, and pulled out a lighter. And he went, "What? Just because I do this, you think I'm going to light it?" And it caught the audience completely off guard. Right? He was very, very good.
Are there many chapters around?
Yeah, in Ottawa, I'll bet you there's probably about a dozen.
That many, right?
Yeah, there are. In most regions. The reason I chose this one was because the only night I really have available is Tuesday evening. So I found one that was available on Tuesday evening, because there are ones that are closer to me geographically, but this one was up and running on Tuesday night. So I said, it's only 20 minutes. I mean, it's no, for a guy who drives 2 hours just to get to the city, it's 20. What's another 20 minutes, right?
Right.
So it didn't bother me, and it's funny because I'm sure each club has its own dynamic, its own mix of personalities, and that I've always tried to, whenever I join a new group, at first, I know it's hard to believe, but I sit back and I don't say much, just to see how the group works dynamically, and then see how I can best fit in without, selling, while still being myself. And these guys made it very easy, so it was a lot of fun. So if you have any, it's also great for boosting your self-confidence, because you're in a very friendly crowd, and because a lot of people are terrified. They just hate standing up and giving information in the form of a speech, whether it be for business or a social event. Like, ask yourselves, if you go to a wedding and the best man is the MC or something like that for the speeches and all that, a lot of them really struggle with it because they're not used to it. They don't practice it. They don't get comfortable with themselves. And when you listen to that, Toastmasters, if I knew that I was going to be doing that in the next 6 months to a year, I would go to Toastmasters. It's just to hone that skill. It's also it improves your self-confidence, and it makes you there's nothing worse that'll make you sound, even though you're not, make you sound silly than doing a lot of ums and ahs and stuttering and floundering around trying to think of coherent thoughts, because you feel like you have all this pressure on you. And Toastmasters helps take that away, because you get some gentle critique and some support, and they do everything they can to make you a better public speaker.
Now, is there a cost involved in joining?
Yes. The first 3 episodes, the first 3 events are free, like you can go as a guest. And after that, it runs probably, I'm going to say, about $100 a year to be a member.
Oh, yeah, that's not too bad.
No, it's not. It's, $20 a month?
And how often do they meet?
This group meets once a week. Some of them, I think, are bi-weekly, and some groups are more active than others. As summertime rolls around and vacations kick in, then they tend not to. Those groups their attendance drops off. Other groups, like this one, a lot of them, because it's downtown, they don't necessarily have cars. And I know at least 1 or 2 of them weren't coming out during the winter because the weather was so cold and the walking was so treacherous.
Yeah, it was awful this year.
Yeah, absolutely.
The ice on the roads and the sidewalks.
Well, we don't need to go down that road again, pardon the pun, but it's something that they acknowledged that was a problem, and now that the warmer weather's coming, they expect their attendance to rise, which is great.
So that's really interesting. I'm glad you're doing it. It sounds like a lot of fun.
It is.
Listen, Nick, we have to do just a little bit of housekeeping here.
Sure.
Very little housekeeping. People who are on the website have already noticed that we switched back to our comments section as opposed to the there's my see? When I have to pause to think about what I want to say. I did it again.
It's something once
Don't
you
make me
notice
laugh,
it,
I'm going to cough.
once you start paying attention to it, you'll catch yourself doing it all the time.
It's not the comments section. What am I trying to say here, Nick? Come on.
The chat feature.
chat. Yeah, we had this. We were experimenting with a live chat section, and it didn't work out so well. Well, it worked out fine, but people had to register, and there were all these things, and it was too cumbersome. So we went back and switched back to the commentary section that we were using before, and it should be fine. I think people will like this a lot better. It's a lot easier. The only problem with it, if you want to call it a problem, is that the comments are not posted to everybody live in real time. So just underneath the comments train, if you will, there is a link that says refresh comments list. You have to hit that every now and then. It won't affect the player, but what it will do is it will update your comments section. You'll be able to see what other people are posting or have posted in the few minutes since you last refreshed the comment section.
Yeah, if you do it every 15 or 20 seconds, you'll stay right on top of what's going on.
Well, yeah, if you want to do it that often.
Or even a minute.
But what else did I want to say? Oh, and don't forget you can call live from anywhere in North America, toll free.
So equipped.
Our number is 858-483.
No,
I knew that. Okay.
No, sorry.
You see, you're wrong and you're reading it.
I'm reading it right off the website.
It's 844-415-2115. 2115.
That's what I said.
844-415-2115.
Yes.
Don't take my word for it. It's right there.
That's right.
In plain writing or plain
text.
Text.
Yes.
Right. On the website.
That's right.
Okay, I'm not doing too badly, but I'm about to have a coughing fit.
Okay.
Over to you, Nick.
All right, I'll take over. So, just as a final tip of the hat to Toastmasters, I think, at least from a first exposure point of view, it was well worth the I think it was a couple of hours. In this particular group has a habit of going out for a drink after every fourth meeting, the last Tuesday of the month. So we went to a little local establishment and got to know each other a little better. And that's always fun because it gives you a chance to get a better handle on who you're talking to, who you're dealing with. And again, I just can't. I don't want to sound like I'm paid by them to advertise, but I just thought it was well worth it. And if anybody else wants to do it, I would heartily recommend it. All right. Let's get into some more serious stuff.
Let's get to the Manning Center Conference.
We're drifting off topic here.
So you were there for a day. You got to meet a lot of different people, interesting people from different places across the country. I think that's the greatest value of the Manning Center Conference. For me, it's not so much of the sessions, although I will learn something from time to time. I don't want to sound like I don't have anything to learn. But for me, the real value of the Manning Center Conference just is in networking and talking to people, meeting new people, and talking to old acquaintances, getting caught up on what they're doing, what's working for them in their field of expertise, what's not working for them. But this was your first time attending, if I'm not mistaken, right? So what were your impressions, Nick?
Well, I think I got the same thing out of it that you did, is the idea that it was a great place to meet like-minded people. What went on in the conference rooms, I didn't really have much. I didn't catch much of that either. I was too busy shaking hands with people and introducing ourselves. We did a little bit of show promotion there, so if anybody is listening who was there, thank you for tuning in. We handed out a whole bucket full of cards and did everything we could to raise our profile a little bit, which is part of the reason for going. But more importantly was to learn who else is out there who has the same basic mindset as we do and see if there are any possibilities of networking together to improve the quality and the quantity of the conservative voice in social media. And I think that was well worth the day. We spent pretty much the bulk of the day there anyway. We were there until, 2:30? or so, 3 o'clock. It was pretty much winding down because that was the last day. But it was certainly well worth the effort. We met some really quality people there.
Okay, that is not the mute button.
No.
The problem before was the mute button. That was pilot error on my part. Sorry about that,
to allow
guys.
you to join in.
What?
That was called a pause to allow you to join in.
Yeah, you shouldn't do that to me, Nick, because my throat is bothering me.
Okay.
My joining in unexpectedly could be nothing more than a fit of cough and choking.
All right.
So, yeah, Manning Center Conference. Now, a lot of people have complained about it, though. It seemed to be, and I'm not complaining, so we're just making conversation about it here a little bit. I think it's interesting. It seemed to be a lot smaller than normal this year. I don't know what the issue was, but there seemed to be fewer people, fewer display booths. That was my impression anyway. I don't have a hard count, and maybe I'm dead wrong. But that was kind of my impression. Now, Karl Rove was the keynote speaker on Thursday night. So
Doug Ford was also there. He spoke as well.
And Doug Ford spoke as well, as did Andrew Scheer. And I didn't hear any of them speak. How do you like that? I just wasn't interested. I've heard all of these guys speak a lot, and it just doesn't. I don't know. I don't get the same charge out of it as other people seem to for some reason.
Well, I think I think what has to happen if I was going to make a critique, and this is done knowing that these people are on our side for the most part, that these people are conservative minded, at least a lot more than you get at a liberal convention. You have they need to find a way to sell themselves to younger people. There were a lot of graybeards in that crowd. There are a lot of because conservatives tend to be of an older stripe to begin with. Most people are naturally socialistic when they're young. To paraphrase Winston Churchill, if you're not a socialist when you're young, you haven't got a head, and if you're still a socialist when you're older, you haven't got a head, or something to that effect is the paraphrase. And I think you saw that in the room. So they have to find ways to attract a younger set. But I think that the way you do that is that instead of working on policy and talking policy, like what's our response to climate change? You can.
Yeah, there was some discussion around that.
Yeah, that's why I picked
on the weekend, and that bothers me a lot. I think that our response to climate change should be really what's our response to the claim of man-made climate change, I should say, and our response should be bollocks.
Yeah. Well, I heard one person say at the conference, or at least around it, that if we're going to have one, let's call it clean air, clean water, and clean land, and leave it at that, because that's real environmental policy. What they should be talking about is what do we do to increase our ranks with younger people. And I think the way you do that is you come out and you sell conservatism for what it is. Stop apologizing for it. Don't go around saying, look, I know I'm a conservative, I'm sorry, but, and for some reason, conservatives are very much afraid of standing up for what they believe in. And I'm being very general in my comments. I don't think that's true across the board, but too many of them are. They don't want to say they're conservative in a crowd because they don't want to have a liberal or a progressive jump down their throat. That kind of stuff I invite. I like if somebody says if I'm talking and somebody says, "Well, what's your point of view?" I'll give them my point of view, and I don't worry about because my point of view is what it is, and if they don't like it, that's a them problem, not mine. Then they can say, well, you're just a conservative. And my answer is, yes, I am. And your problem with that would be what exactly? But now, mind you, I have a bit of an advantage. I'm 57. I don't care what other people think. I've got years of debating people behind me in different forums. So it doesn't bother me that people don't necessarily like my political point of view. Not everybody's cut out that way. But I think you need to start moving in that direction. Stop apologizing for being conservative. You want to have a seminar. How about that one?
Well, I agree with you. I think that we have to have a conservative intelligentsia more than a conservative apologencia.
Yes.
And there's that again. I do this a lot. Now I'm going to stop and pause every time I go
Well, what
I'm
you
going to
do
go
is
in response to my ahs and ums.
What I'll do is I'll put this
No,
mug in front of you.
No.
Every time you say an you drop a quarter in it.
No,
and I get to keep change.
That's not going to happen, Nick. That's not going to happen. There were a lot of young people at the conference, though, you have to admit.
I was actually a little bit... Excuse me.
Yeah, you were a little surprised by the number of young people there. Yeah, it's
but
there are, but they're not. The problem I have is that I don't think very many of them really appreciated, what it means to be a conservative. I think that's really the problem. Is I don't really hear a lot of talk or consideration as to what goes into being a conservative. And so, you spend a lot of time not being a liberal, whatever that means.
Well,
and, if you really want to confuse people, you do what I did on the weekend, and I pointed out to somebody that, really deep down, I'm a liberal. I'm a genuine liberal, not like these putzes today, okay? Which is what makes me a conservative. Because conservatism is really not ideological. Liberalism is more ideological by far than conservatism. Conservatism really is probably of all of the isms, it's the least idealistic, or it's the least ideological, I should say. So what makes me a conservative? Well, I want to preserve the traditions and the institutions and the framework within which traditional classical liberalism is possible. So how's that for confusing people? I'm a conservative because I'm a liberal.
Well, I think they have to understand what you mean by liberal, and that is what we call the classic liberal, because liberal means liberty. It means freedom from. It means all the things that everybody thinks conservatism means: smaller government, lower taxes, more freedom, more responsibility. All these things; those are all classic liberal positions, and the two terms have been turned on their head over the last 100 years or so. Because I would consider myself a classic liberal the same as you do. It's just that if I say that, nobody knows what I'm talking about. And then it takes a 20-minute explanation just to see if they can understand. And it's not that they're stupid. They just never heard it framed that way.
Maybe instead of trying to take over the Conservative Party, we should be trying to take over the Liberal Party.
Oh, man. They wouldn't spot us coming. But actually, there's a grain of truth to that, because let's face it, if you're going to go back to your traditional names, labels, if you want, then classic liberal. Can you imagine starting a party in Ontario or Canada called the Classic Liberal Party, and then watch people lose their minds because they don't even know what it is? To define yourself as a classic liberal means that you want freedom of speech. You want freedom of all the charters, the freedoms encased in the charter. You want the right to keep and bear arms. You want the right to private property. You want all these rights and responsibilities without undue infringement by the state. The state is going to infringe on you at some point, somehow, some way. But that doesn't mean, and you accept that. Okay, it's not that we don't want. It's not that we don't want to pay taxes. We don't want to pay taxes to the point where half our income goes out the window, because everybody understands the need for fire, police, ambulance, infrastructure, the military. Those are all good things that serve us all that we have to pay taxes for. All of us can agree on that. But when you start funding things like affirmative action, or you start funding things like multiculturalism, which is just affirmative action by another name, all these things, spreading French across the country, even where it's not warranted, that's not what our taxes are for. And I think that's where a lot of people misunderstand what modern conservatism, or classic liberalism, as want to put it, is really all about. Because remember that the state never spends your money as well as you do. No matter how poorly you spend it, they'll always make a dog's breakfast out of it. And there's more than enough examples of that. I don't need to list any. Just think liberals and bridges. And that's the best example I can think of right off the top of my head, because they just don't know how to build them.
Okay, Joel has made a comment that I want to respond to, but I'm not going to do it until after the break.
Is it break time already?
It has to do with SOCONs abandoning classical liberals. So brace yourself, Joel. I might push back on that a little bit when we get back for the next section of the Combat Zone here on thinkradio.ca. Okay, you are entering back into the Combat Zone. I am Joe. He is Nick. And together, we're Nick and Joe, the hosts of the Combat Zone. I'm just injecting a little bit of lightheartedness. It's not really humor, Nick. I'm not really a stand-up comedian. Although my wife tells me I could be funny. Of course, I'm never sure if she means funny ha-ha or funny, roll your eyebrows, all your eyeballs up into your head funny.
Now, you had a comment you wanted to get back to. Joel had said something.
Right. So Joel was writing, not trying to single you out, Joel, so apologize for this, but Joel was writing on the commentary section about SOCONs having abandoned liberalism or traditional liberalism. And I don't have the comment in front of me. Sorry, Joel. So I am...
You want me to read it?
Yeah, go ahead and read it while I cough here in the background.
Joel says, I will say the SOCONs have abandoned classical liberalism or libertarianism.
Okay.
That's his comment.
That's the comment. So I was pretty close. I don't know what you mean by that, Joel. I hear this kind of thing a lot where they go, well, SOCONs are trying to impose their moral views on the rest of us. And I just don't think that that's the case. In fact, if you look at a guy like me or Nick, we've been in the trenches in the culture wars for a long time between the two of us. And I don't think you'll hear us talking about, forcing people to go to church or to say their prayers at night or, to sit in the corner quietly and reflect carefully over their life on the Sabbath, whether you observe that on the Saturday or the Sunday. Really, honestly, as a classic liberal, I say to each their own. But I guess the problem arises when you ask yourself, what is it that you base your liberalism on? It's fine to say, you should treat your fellow man properly, etc. But really, that's a moral position to take. And I know a lot of my friends, libertarians, are going to say, well, people make a calculation, and it's, people say, well, I have to give up the right to burn my neighbor's house down, steal their wife, and murder their children, because if I have that right, then they have the right to do that to me. And there is an element of that for sure, but I don't really think that's what the equation is in most cases. I think that if we were faced with a situation like that, most of us would make the observation that it's just plain wrong, irrespective of whether or not you can make a utilitarian argument in favor of restraint, because by restraining yourself, you're restraining other people are restraining themselves too. That's a very strong utilitarian argument, but I say that it's a stronger argument to say that people should behave themselves because it's the morally correct thing to do. And I promote that. Would I force people to do it? Well, that depends on what you're talking about. I do think that you have to have the state force people to not kill their fellow man. I think you have to have a law against that. But ultimately, a free society, a truly free society, is one where individuals are able to rule over themselves, where they don't really have to have the apparatus of state, the strong arm of the state imposing all of these rules and regulations on us. If that makes me libertarian, fine. If that makes me liberal, fine. However you want to characterize it. But the important thing that liberals and those who are anti-social conservative fail to grasp is that my self-restraint and your self-restraint is predicated on something. It's not predicated on that utilitarian calculation that people like to wave around.
Well, if you don't have it predicated on something, what makes us any different than the beasts of the field that rule themselves by the law of the jungle? There has to be some code of ethics, some standard by which we all hold each other to. Now, in Western culture, that's called the Judeo-Christian ethic. So if we really want to boil it down, it's the Ten Commandments. Now, that doesn't mean, as you point out, that we expect everybody to, A, become Christian or Jewish or any other faith for that matter, because you're right. To each his own. Live and let live. As long as they can live their lives benignly and not impose in undue ways. Like, there's nothing wrong with somebody sitting down and discussing, you and I have done this before, discussing the differences and the similarities between Christianity and Judaism. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But if one person tries to force their worldview, whatever it is, by force on another person or group, that's wrong. That's why we fought World War II, because that's what Hitler was trying to do. That's why what Mao Zedong did in China was wrong. That's why what's going on in North Korea is wrong, because there's no choice. You have no option. And in a free and democratic society, that is the heart of it, is as much individual liberty as you can have without falling into anarchy. Because the opposite of tyranny is not freedom, it's anarchy.
Correct.
So the point is that while I want to be able, we have an issue going on right now in Renfrew County. As a matter of fact, there's a meeting on Friday night. If you're in Renfrew County and you care about your property rights, you need to be at the Renfrew, was it the Renfrew? No, Pembroke. I think it's the Pembroke Legion at 7 p.m. Oh, Cobden. You know what? I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to look it up. I've got it posted on Facebook. But there's a meeting for landowners in that town. I think it's Cobden. That's where they normally hold it. Anyway, they are decrying the Renfrew County doing by regulation what they can't get away with through legislation. And that is controlling the private property of private landowners. Now, we fought this fight before. Now, that doesn't mean we get out the shotguns and the pitchforks and the torches and storm, the town council. It means we show up in numbers and privately protest and let somebody speak for us so that the township, or in this case the county, understands that we are not going to sit idly by and let them impose this on us. That's what it means. You hold the state accountable by showing up in numbers and quietly, peacefully protesting. There's a place for everything, and this is how you do it in a democracy. So if you don't have that mechanism, then what you have is tyranny. If the state can do whatever it wants, and that's not working, that does nothing to further the individual freedoms that we're all supposed to enjoy. And this is part of being a good citizen. Now, in people who are progressive, who think that the collective is more important than the individuals in it, which is a very deeply flawed worldview, in my opinion, they don't see any problem with trying to regulate what you do in your own backyard, because they can make some collective argument, well, you've got a garden. You can't have a garden because that degrades the value of or you can't have a little fire pit in your backyard, okay, if you live in this city, because that somebody might complain, or somebody else might be allergic to wood smoke. Look, that's not my problem. It's a free country. I own the land. If I want to have a little fire pit, who's to tell me no? So anyway, this is the kind of thing that separates people who are, let's call them classic liberals, who believe in live and let live, and that as long as you're not polluting the air, water, and soil of your neighbor, then you should be able to do whatever you want to on your property. This is the kind of thing that I believe in, and I am more than willing to let somebody else live and do whatever they want to on their property, as long as it's not impinging on my ability to do the same thing on mine. That, I think, is a very comfortable compromise that most people would make.
Okay, well, I want to get back to Joel for a minute, not to single you out still, Joel. I know you said in the comment section that you're happy with it. But I just want to make a couple of other comments. And Nick, I think you touched on it quite brilliantly. The opposite of tyranny is not freedom. The opposite of tyranny is anarchy. You have to have rules. And even the strongest libertarians believe in rules. And
to some degree, yes.
So, now, Joel, when you talk about SoCons, you right away go to the gay thing and the marriage thing. Well, let me tell you something. As a SoCon, maybe you haven't heard this anywhere else, but as a very strong SoCon and well-known SoCon in this country, I don't have a particular problem with people with gay behavior. It's not for me. I follow a code of behavior that says that it's wrong, but I'm not in a position to say that everybody should follow that code of behavior. If they're going to adopt that code of behavior, which would be, I would call it Judeo-Christian, although Muslims, I guess, are against gay lifestyle as well. But it's not a question of being gay or not gay. It's a question of whether or not you practice something that is prohibited according to the rules that you follow. But set that aside for a second, okay? Because that's a personal choice thing. But the thing about marriage, there's my cough again, sorry. The thing about marriage that I really want to point out is that it's the controversy has never been about whether or not gay men or gay women should be allowed to marry. The argument has always been about the definition of marriage. The state doesn't have the power to suddenly change the definition of something simply because it wants to be inclusive, okay? Whether you like it or not. I mean, I'm not saying same-sex couples shouldn't get together, okay? Again, maybe not for me, but when you turn around and you say that that's a marriage, it's not a marriage. A marriage is between a man and a woman to the exclusion of all others. That's the definition of marriage. So the fight always was about a definition, and the government saying through the courts that it was discriminatory to say that gay people couldn't marry. And we said, well, I don't understand. That's like saying it's discriminatory that somebody who prefers never get wet gets wet when they go in the shower. So, I'm struggling to find the right analogy, but I think it's really important to understand that the argument about gay marriage is not simply a question of whether or not people should be able to live together and have a stable life together. There are serious legal and public policy implications to some of the decisions that have been made that have not been adequately considered, and that has nothing to do with what we might call traditional morality. So I guess I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent. It wasn't one of the subjects that we had planned on speaking about, but I thought it was important just to touch base on that a little bit, just because it's such an important issue. I continue to be opposed to the concept of same-sex marriage because that's like calling a green light red and red light green. And I know people out there are not going to get it because they're going to, well, why? It's nowhere near the same thing. And in the end, why not change the definition of green to red and red to green? Like, who does it harm, right? Well, the harm is to the principle of consistency in language and definition. And marriage is a predominantly, and I would argue an exclusively, religious institution. I don't think the state, frankly, has any business in the marriage business. I would like to see the state out of the marriage business altogether. But anyway, sorry about that, Joel. Didn't mean to single you out there, but and I'm not sure that I really explained myself as well as perhaps I ought to have. But at least I didn't and awe that much.
No, you did a fine job.
What's the next topic? Let's get off the marriage thing there.
Well, there's a bunch of them. Why don't we've got about 10 minutes left before the top of the hour, so why don't we do the growing glacier in Greenland? How it's bucking the trend of global warming. Now, there's an article, if I can find it. I've got it right. No, that's the New Zealand shooter. I can kill that. Don't need that. Where did it go? It's okay to be white. Yeah, we'll get to that. Fastest. Here we are. Okay, fastest in the Greenland glacier threw NASA scientists for a loop. It's actually growing. No kidding. Now, they give a whole bunch of reasons for this.
Right.
But,
probably the biggest reason is probably global warming.
Well, what they say is the reason for the reverse in the trend. Okay? Because it was melting at about 130 feet, losing about 130 feet of thickness a year and shrinking by about 1.3 miles a year. Okay, which in glacial terms is fast. Okay, and they say it was a leading contributor to oceanic sea rise. Well, look, every sea rise prediction I've ever seen.
Oceanic sea rise that we're still waiting to see evidence of.
Exactly, that's exactly where I was going.
That's nonsense.
Every prediction I've made has been wildly wrong. Is the ocean rising? Maybe a little bit. Okay, maybe. But
Nick, well, I know. I'm about to say it as though I'm correcting you, but I know you know this. Okay, when people talk about the sea level rising by half an inch or an inch or 2 inches, okay, those kinds of rises are not measurable. They are so small in contrast to the magnitude of the oceans and the waters, and the reason you can't measure that kind of rise is because you have to have, in order to be able to measure sea level, you have to accurately to within those
kinds of parameters,
within those small amounts over periods of time, is because the way you have to do it is you have to have a calm sea with no tides, with no other variables affecting where the water level is. Okay, when you have a hurricane or a strong storm and you have a storm surge where the sea level rises 10 meters or 20 meters, that's not actually the sea level rising, that's the storm surge.
Right.
And the water is always moving. The earth is, the water is sloshing around in the earth, and people don't really, I think, have a grasp of how much water there is.
Well, you and I
planet.
both know from personal experience how big the Atlantic is. I mean, there's so much water. Most people have no concept of how much water it would take to raise the world, because you cannot raise just the water level in the Atlantic. You have to raise all the water on the planet and the oceans and the seas, because they're all interconnected. You can't fill the left-hand side of a bathtub without filling the right half. So if you have a half an inch sea level rise, that takes place all over the planet, not just in, say, Halifax. You have the amount of water required to do that is so vast. Think of the Pacific Ocean. You know, it used to take 1.5 years to cross in the days of sail at about 4 to 6 knots. To circumnavigate the globe, it took about 1.5 years. To cross the Pacific, they didn't calculate it in days or even weeks. It was months. To cross the Atlantic used to take 6 weeks. It's just, there's so, even today, if you cruise at 14 knots, leave England, it takes you 10 days to get from England to Halifax at 14 knots to cross the Atlantic Ocean. It's just that people have no idea how big these massive bodies of water are. That does not include the Arctic, Antarctic, the Indian Ocean, or any of the other, the Pacific or the Atlantic. I think I got them all. But the point is, you just don't turn on a tap and all of a sudden the water shoots up 20 feet, like Al Gore wanted you to believe. So this whole thing about the glacier, first of all, we are still coming out of a glacial period. It's not all that long ago where you and I now sit. There was 3 or 4 miles of ice over our heads, or would have been if we had been here at the time. Okay, well, that compresses the land. I watched and as the weight comes off, the land springs back, but it takes a tremendous amount of time for that to happen. So what you really see is land rising and falling given the movement of tectonic plates, earthquakes, eruptions, things like that. There was a documentary I watched about the island of Iwo Jima, and they mentioned that the beach is now 200 yards longer than it was in 1945 when the Marines came ashore. because the where some of the old wrecked landing craft are, it's 100 to 200 yards from high tide. So the island has actually lifted up out of the water since then. We've had other islands sinking into the ocean because they're volcanic and they're being eroded. So they just, this kind of nonsense about this whole global warming thing, this is just another example of how they're cherry-picking statistics to try to fit the narrative. And it's one of those things that just makes me crazy, because most people, if they just took a moment to think, and what happens, this is one of the problems we have with our education system. They teach kids how to hug a tree and recycle a can, but they can't add, read, or think critically. And they never question anything. They think the guy in the white lab coat working in a laboratory is, for all intents and purposes, God, and he can never be wrong. And yet science is so filled with mistakes, because that's how science is built. You put forward a proposal, or theory, and then everybody else in the world tests it. And if they can't duplicate and come up with the same results that you did, it's thrown out, because obviously there's a flaw in it. Even Einstein said that all it takes to defeat one of my theories is one fact. You don't have to have consensus. You just have to have the facts. And that's why it doesn't matter if 97% of the scientists agree. Consensus is not how science is done. So this article I thought was very timely when it comes to just buttressing that argument again about how we're fooling ourselves to think that mankind has the ability, even accidentally, to impact the most complex system on the planet in a negative way. And that the planet would not, does not change. It's been, they say, well, yes, it changes, but we've never seen it change so fast. Sorry.
No, that's fine. And I just want to point out to Joel again, because Joel's really active in the comment section. You're right, Joel, about climate change. Climate has always changed, and we are not denying that. That's not a trap we fall into. The issue is whether or not climate change is man-made. But when we talk about, sometimes we get caught up in the whole climate change and global warming debate. If you take a chunk out of what we're saying, it sounds like we're denying climate change and even denying global warming. I mean, I don't know. How can you... I'm not going to deny global warming. I'm just going to say that the evidence of global warming is not, very good. Maybe it is global, but what I am against is the notion that
it's our fault.
It's our fault that somehow or other, humanity is causing global warming. And by the way, I just like to point out that they used to cultivate, they used to grow crops on Greenland.
Yeah, well, that's why they called it Greenland.
It's not. So it's of course the climate changes.
Yeah, we're not denying that it changes.
So I just want to make sure you understand that, Joel.
We just don't believe that it's our fault that it is. And
we don't even think it's your fault, Joel.
No, it's not even your fault, and there's no reason to feel guilty. You know what? For the sake of discussion, with the last couple of seconds here we have before we go to break, let's assume that the climate the climate is changing rapidly, no matter whether it's our fault or not. First of all, I'm not even convinced that's happening. I think it is changing. It's taking much longer than they want us to believe that it is. Predictions are 1/2 of 1 degree over the next 80 years. That's hardly what I would call a catastrophic change. But let's say, for an example, that they're correct. Is it better to try to stop the change or adapt to it? Would making Canada a country that's warmer by 1/2 of 1 degree over the next century be a bad thing? The answer to both those questions is no. Or no, sorry, the second is no, and the first one is yes. Of course it makes sense to adapt, because that's what we've always done. When something changes in the natural world, we adapt to it. Rivers change course. The Aral Sea in Eurasia, I think it's in Russia actually, used to be a very viable fishery, fed most of the people in Russia. Now it's nothing but a little trickle, if it's anything left at all. It's a dry, empty, sandy pit now, because there's been some change. I think the Russians diverted some water or something. I forget why it went dry, but it went dry. So now that whole community that was built around that is gone. We're not denying it, but we're saying that you have to adapt to it. Instead of worrying about it, think about this, Joel. Let's say that that happened, that we're a degree or a degree and a half warmer by 2100. Think about the arable land we'd have. Think about how many more acres we could put under the plow and create more food. That's not a bad thing.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've exhausted this one, and
I think so.
I'm not, I'm not sure that we all agree on everything. The final word I think I'll have on this one, Joel, just again referring to sea levels and tides, etc., is that you are right. You can measure tides, and in generally speaking, you can measure sea levels. You cannot measure over a period of time a half an inch or a quarter of an inch or a 1 inch difference in sea levels and tides, okay? Because it doesn't matter. I'm just telling you, when we know when the tide is coming in, we know when the tide is going out, and we know what the tide levels are going to be, but we don't know what the tide level is going to be calculated to the nearest inch, okay? There's no tide table and there's no buoys anywhere on the planet that purport to make that measurement. So if you have a tide line, okay, on a pier, which some people like to put these little lines for high tide and low tide. Sometimes the tide's going to be an inch or two higher than that line. Sometimes high tide's going to be an inch or two lower than that line. A great example, a practical example, and it's a bit of an exaggeration because there are other factors that go into it, is Venice. As you know, I have relatives in Venice. And Nick, the high tide, sometimes high tide is below ground level. It's not really ground because it's on all of Venice is
First
on
floor
a
level
platform. Okay, so their platform that was built on stilts.
Yeah.
Okay. Sometimes high tide actually is higher than that, and the ground level, including ground floors and buildings, etc., flood out.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to predict because other factors go into these things. So that's all I'm saying. We're not arguing the ability to measure. We're arguing the ability to measure so minutely. And I ask you, go back to your high school mathematics where you learned the principle of significant digits. Okay, because you cannot measure things that precisely in the circumstances. Anyway, we're rambling on here a little bit, Nick, and he's gesticulating wildly. He's going, break time, come on. Why haven't we taken a break here? So I guess we're about to take a break. Is that right, Nick?
That would be. We are now a minute over, so we need to take a break.
Okay, we'll see you guys on the other side in the combat zone on thinkradio.ca.
Welcome back to the Combat Zone, folks. Hour 2 straight ahead. I'm Nick, he's Joe, and we've had you know what? The chat room really seems to be working tonight. If you're just listening, we've been back and forth. Joel has been making some great comments. There's been some spicy debate, we love that stuff. So don't be shy. If you're listening and you want to join in, please feel free. You can also call us at 1-844-415-2115. We actually do have the capability of taking phone calls, and we certainly do enjoy them. And they take precedence over conversation between Joseph and I every single time. So we will certainly take those. Now, let's talk, since we were talking about global warming and who's guilty and who's not, and whether adaptation is better than trying to change it, which is my attitude, if it's actually as serious a problem as they say it is. I think we've got far more important concerns to deal with, like dirty water, dirty land, and dirty air. But that aside, the carbon tax comes and lands his greedy hooks into us next week.
The federal carbon tax.
Yes, the federal carbon tax. And I will, you know what? We've had some criticism about Doug Ford in the past. There's the whole Randy Hillier affair. There's a bunch of different things that you wouldn't expect from a conservative government that are happening. And, you know, we've been, when somebody, even we might call friends, is doing something that we don't think fits into what a conservative, and I use the term loosely, small c maybe, or what a conservative government should be doing, we're going to call them on it.
Well, Nick, I know you're a hockey fan. You're a Leafs fan, although heaven knows why. But have they collapsed yet, by the way? Or they?
No, they haven't collapsed. They're going to play Boston in the first round.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, the collapse is imminent.
As a matter of fact, they lost in overtime to Flyers tonight. So they got a point.
See what I mean? Anyway.
It's not a collapse. They're in the playoffs.
Just be patient. It's coming, Nick. It's coming.
You've been telling me that for 6 weeks.
Just preparing you for the inevitable. Anyway, think of us as referees, okay? We call them as we see them.
That's right.
That's it. We're all friends. We're all friends.
So the carbon tax is going to be foisted upon. Now, the reason I mentioned Doug Ford was because he's doing what I consider God's work fighting this thing. And that he's promised to use every tool in his toolbox to roll this back. And now, one of the upsides of the whole SNC-Lavalin affair, which will not die, by the way.
And Nick, by the way, guys, Nick could not wait to get that line in. Oh. I didn't want to talk about this because it's just been going on and on and on and on and on.
And we have to.
And I'm bored about it. And so we said, let's not talk about this. So we wrote out everything we were going to talk about.
Yeah.
And Nick just could not help it. He had to fit that line in. I can't help it.
It's just, okay. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but
you're going to spend some time on it?
Trudeau's his own worst enemy in this case. And if his government does fall, then at least there may be a chance we can get rid of this thing before October. Wouldn't that be nice? So that's my hope. Whether it'll happen, I don't know. However, getting back to Ontario, Doug Ford is doing everything he can to, if not completely repeal it, then mitigate it, which I think is an excellent thing. Because this carbon tax, starting in the first week of April, I would imagine that'll be the first, start on April 1st.
April Fool's.
Yeah, of course, April Fool's Day. Who's the fool? Is going to add at least 5 cents a liter to the price of gasoline. The gasoline's gone up. I couldn't get over it. I woke up, I went to bed one night, it was $1.05. The next morning, it was $1.15. Yeah, just boom, like that.
Yeah, I have noticed that. I was a little surprised, and I was driving around the other day thinking to myself, has the carbon tax come in yet? It's very weird. So I don't really know what's going on with that.
I don't know either, and I'm just looking for the story here. I've got it somewhere. No, that's the story. That is an article about the PT-17 Stearman. That's got nothing to do with tonight's show.
Oh man, Nick's surfing on his computer.
I was just looking at airplanes. I can't help it. Okay. Oh yeah, the new carbon tax. Economists say carbon taxes are the most effective way to reduce greenhouse gases. The headline is from CBC. No surprise. No, the bottom line here is making everything more expensive isn't going to reduce greenhouse gas. All it's going to do is put more money in the government's pocket at the expense of you. And this kind of nonsense drives me crazy.
Well, I'm not going to defend the argument too much. I just want to point out that there is some logic in the argument that if you make certain behaviors more expensive, then those behaviors, the people will indulge those behaviors less and less. And I think that's more or less the argument behind a carbon tax, that if you make car driving more expensive, then people are going to drive their cars less. The argument against that, of course, is that we live in Canada where people have to drive their cars.
That's right.
And especially in the wintertime. You know, there's this pipe dream about public transit. Great. Have public transit. I'm not against people taking buses or subways or trams or trolleys or whatever in the wintertime, in the summertime. Whenever they want to take them, that's okay with me. I don't take them. I drive. If I have to go downtown, I drive. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'll carpool. Sometimes my wife will drive me and pick me up. But we drive.
That's right.
I don't walk to the bus. Now, I have reasons that I don't, walk to the bus, particularly in the wintertime with the roads the way they are. But it's just the same. This is Canada. I've said this before, Nick. This public transportation stuff in Europe that people keep pointing to and going, wow, look at what they're doing in France or in Germany or in the United Kingdom. It works there. It works better there because they have larger populations and considerably smaller territory,
and
which means there's
climate.
A greater density, and it's easier to get from point A to point B in public transit.
They also had 1,000 years to put it into place.
Well, that is absolutely true as
well. The London subway was first opened in the 1840s.
Yeah, I don't know the exact year, but it was.
I don't know, but it certainly wasn't yesterday. It's been there a long time.
You're absolutely right.
So,
the problem with the argument of carbon, quite apart from whether or not people are actually going to change their behavior as a consequence of having the tax imposed, and that's a prediction. Whether it comes true or not remains to be seen. But the bigger question is, if you're going to punish people for driving their cars, okay, by making it more expensive, and remember, it's the people who can afford it the least that end up paying the most.
Well, it's not not just cars either. Everything is going to be more expensive. Think about it. Name me one thing that you can go to a store and buy that didn't come to that store in the back of a truck.
Well, the back of an electric truck.
Yeah, like that's carbon neutral.
Well, but there's no such thing. There's no such thing as you drove a rig for many years.
Yep.
When was the last time you saw an electric powered?
Well, Tesla's talking about one, but there are no electric.
Yeah.
Trucks.
They talk. Okay,
I know.
It's not going to happen.
So but
the price. You're right. The price of everything goes up.
It's also going to be on not just luxury items like a fancy new pair of shoes or a lady's evening gown. It's going to be on eggs and milk and butter and bread. The stuff you need every day, toilet paper, feminine hygiene product, toothpaste, mouthwash, all the stuff you need just to function in society is going to go and get more and more expensive, and the longer it goes. So how is this going to change people's behavior? Do you think people are going to quit brushing their teeth? Do you think they're going to stop, eating bread? Do you think what's the whole point of this? You can't just levy a tax, a carbon tax on transportation, and expect it not to have impact anyplace else. It's insane,
right? And of course, because people will be paying more for things. The government, the federal government, in its wisdom, Justin Trudeau, I hate to use the term wisdom and Justin Trudeau together, but you could tell I was being, tongue-in-cheek, a little satire there, sarcasm, irony, whatever you want to call it. The point I'm making here, Nick is just totally ignoring me. I thought he was going to be cheering from the sidelines.
I'm just responding to Marin's question.
Anyway, the real problem is that if you're subsidized, if things cost more, and so you don't want people to have to pay more, so you give them a subsidy check at the end of the year or to offset the added price.
But where does the money for the subsidy
what
check
is the
come
point
from?
of it? What is the point of it? I don't get it. I don't. It's. I don't even know that I would call it a money grab.
Well, no,
I mean,
okay.
in a certain sense, it is. But then you're turning around, you're giving the money back.
Remember when they said the GST was going to be revenue neutral? Do you remember that?
Yeah, well,
you
GST...
show me one tax that has actually, they said, well, it's going to be, first of all, if it's revenue neutral, what's the point? And secondly, there hasn't been one that I know of.
Now, you see, now I'm going to get into more trouble with our listeners because I'm going to defend the GST.
I'm not knocking. No, I don't.
It was.
Here's why I don't knock the GST, because it was a cut of about was 13 down to 9% under Mulrooney. His mistake was showing it to us. I'm not. So it's not the GST
no, in
specifically.
fact, that wasn't a mistake. That was the whole point. The whole point was
the mistake was he miscalculated how the public would react.
Well, okay, but in a sense, he was a victim of his own success.
Right.
Remember the old HST, which people have no idea about because they never saw it, but you used to pay significant amounts of money in federal sales tax. I said HST, I meant FST. And so, there were manufactured goods where we would see the price go from it started off at 6% federal sales tax. Over the course of about 2 years, it jumped to 12 or 13% federal sales tax on certain items. And of course, that was never shown to the consumer. That only got built into the price. But if you take an item, it's not unusual to set the retail list price of something at double the wholesale price. So if you took something that was, let's say, $10, and then you had a 12% federal sales tax on the wholesale price because that's where it was charged, okay, and then they would double it. So essentially, you were paying 24 cents on a $2.40 tax, or 24% on a $10 item. Now, of course, you were paying $24 for it when you bought it, plus the provincial sales tax on top of that.
Right.
So what the GST did was it took all of those hidden taxes, and the government said under Brian Mulroney, rather than trying to sneak them in, because what was happening was the government was really hard up for money at the time, deficit after deficit after deficit. And so what they would do is they would just raise the federal sales tax, and nobody complained about it because it was just inflation.
Yeah.
When really it was tax increases. Okay. So it was a scam, and the GST completely eliminated that.
I'm not against.
And of course, everybody was furious because now they're paying federal sales tax.
Right.
But they always were paying federal sales tax.
So that's what I mean. That's almost an exception to the rule. But you show me any tax that is revenue neutral. The first question I still think remains unanswered is what's the point if it's revenue neutral? Why bother? Because then you're just shuffling chairs around on the Titanic. And the second thing is, when you're trying to change people's behavior, you don't do it by making everything more expensive. Because what's the focus? Like if you have a sin tax on booze or smokes, okay, look, I don't like those. I think that sin taxes are ridiculous. But if you want to do that, if you want to reduce drinking and driving, and you think that making alcohol more expensive is going to reduce that, instead of putting money in bootleggers' pockets, okay, fine. That might be your tactic. I might not agree, but at least you can say this is why we think this will work. Okay, because you're targeting one specific activity. But when you shotgun it like this, when you broadcast it across, and then the government says, oh, by the way, you're not really going to pay it. We're going to give you that back at the end of the year. Then why take it in the first place? I mean, look, first of all, you're never going to get back everything you pay. There's no physical way for that to work. The sticky machinery of government will suck up at least some of that in just the processing. And if he says, let's say, if you pay $100 in carbon tax, we're going to give you back $100. No, it's going to cost you $120 or $130 by the time they're done with it, even if you don't see it up front. It's all a shell game, and this stuff makes me crazy. That there's so much about this that's wrong. And when Justin Trudeau comes out and says, well, we're working hard for the, if I hear him say it one more time, I'm going to scream, working hard for the middle class and those trying to join it. You know what? I don't want people working hard to join the middle class. I want them working hard to join the upper class. That's what I want. I want people to become more successful, not going from the bottom to mediocrity. I want them to going from the bottom to the top. And but he never says that. Anyway.
Yeah, of course, that happens an awful lot more than people realize.
Of course it does.
It's called income mobility.
That's right. And nobody as Ben Shapiro makes a great point, people don't stay there. You know, they say the top 1%, but that 1% fluctuates and changes about who's in it.
Yeah, in every statistical category, it's just statistical categories. It's not the actual people that are in the statistical category. You're in the top 1% this year. Next year, you're in the top 10%, or you've dropped down to the, you know, it's a fluctuating thing, and the fluctuation is much greater at the top than it is at the bottom. Absolutely.
Well, and I'm not against trying to help people move from the bottom to the middle class, but only in a transitionary sense. Like, you know, I want us all to be millionaires. That's what I want. I want people to be able to afford the things in life that come with our kind of culture in our society. People often get mad at a multimillionaire who buys a $150 million yacht. Why? Think of the work he creates. Somebody's got to build that yacht. Somebody's got to maintain it. Somebody's got to crew it. Somebody's got to be the cook on board. Somebody's got to be the navigator and the captain. All those people would not be employed if the guy hadn't bought the yacht. So let's stop banging on the rich. You know, this kind of stuff and carbon taxes. And then they wonder why people hide their money offshore in these Swiss bank accounts or down in Panama or some of these in the Turks and Caicos or different places like that. And they shelter their money from taxation here in Canada. No wonder. If you make $1 million a year, do you want to pay the government $400,000 or $500,000 of that? I know I sure wouldn't, because these people, whether you like to believe it or not, work hard for their money. Now, they might not be digging a ditch like the guy running a backhoe might, but it's not, you know, the rewards for their efforts deserve to be recognized, not penalized, because they employ the rest of us. And I'm sick and tired of this nonsense. Anyway, so that's the carbon tax, I think, is a failed before it ever gets started program. And I certainly hope it dies a very quick death, because the last thing we need is another tax. I'm done with it. It's just enough to make me, like, if I could find a way around it, I would. Now, I'm not somebody who normally goes trying to skirt the law, but how are you going to do that? If they raise the price of fuel, you have to buy it no matter what. Like, I live 2 hours away. I'm not moving to the city just because they raised the price of gas 5 cents. You know, I would rather stay at home in the valley on my farm and make a living there than I would have to pay, you know, $50 or $75 or $100 a ton for carbon. Now, I may be a little unique that way. Some people say, well, I just can't afford to do that. Okay, fine. But there's got to be a breaking point. People, that was the original reason for all that fuss in France to begin with. People got mad at Macron for putting a carbon tax on their fuel. Fuel in France is expensive enough. And when he did that, he touched off weeks of protest that turned violent and just got out of hand, and it was a complete and total disaster I don't think they're finished with yet. But the spark that lit that all off was the carbon tax.
Well, they love to protest in France.
Yeah, I know, and they certainly made it. They certainly set France on fire doing it. All right, now I think we milked that cow pretty dry.
Really?
Yeah. Well, was I not clear enough about what I wanted to say about that carbon tax?
Yeah, come on, Nick. Let's talk for 5 minutes about your favorite topic.
What's that?
Omar Khadr.
Oh, yeah, my favorite topic. Okay, let me bring this story up here.
Omar Khadr, his sentence is now complete.
Not in my mind, it's not.
Allegedly.
Well, they say that because he was...
he's no longer on probation.
Right. That had he been incarcerated the whole time, his sentence would be complete. Now, the problem with that is that he never should have been released. The RCMP should have met him when he came to Canada, when we took him back. Why we took him back from the Americans, I have no idea. I think the man is a treasonous slug. He should have been prosecuted for treason and spent the rest of his life in a tiny little hole somewhere where we could drop him a ham sandwich once a week and, you know, give him an hour of sunlight every 4 or 5 days. Or put him up on Hans Island, something along that line. But I'm just sick to death of hearing about this guy and the smug look on his face the fact he's got $10.5 million of our dollars, and this guy was a terrorist, is an unrepentant terrorist. And he's never said he did say he was going to do everything he could to help the Spear family. Well, that was nothing but crocodile tears because, to the best of my knowledge, he's never lifted a finger. The medics on the battlefield saved his life, even though was busy trying to kill them. So I don't have any sympathy for the guy. And it drives me crazy when I run into people who do. Because like you, I wore the Queen's uniform, and I hold that oath even today, that if somebody attacks, let's not forget we're a member of NATO. An attack against one is an attack against all. And it very easily could have been Canadian troops he engaged. And I just have no time for that. I'm not suggesting we bring back the firing squad, but I certainly think that he should spend the rest of his life in jail, not walking around with over $10 million of our dollars in his pocket, laughing at us when the court lets him free. It's just, I'm sorry that there's so many problems with this. It might be completely legal. Maybe the courts did exactly what they were supposed to do, but that doesn't make me feel any better about it.
You're not really running out of steam on this, are you?
No, I just if I go on, I'll just blow my stack. I mean, the guy, he not only, don't forget, he didn't just kill a medic, he blinded another one, or at least partially blinded another one. I forget who the other guy was, but now he's lost sight in one eye. So you've got a widow, Mrs. Spears, with a couple of kids who will never see their father because this slug was on a battlefield. And everybody says, well, his father brought him into it. Yes, and he embraced it. Because that wasn't the first time he ever embraced terrorism. He was a bomb builder for I think it was ISIS, or whatever the manifestation of ISIS was at the time. He built IEDs. He planted IEDs. He was involved in terrorist activities. And there's a famous picture of him building a bomb, grinning like an idiot, thinking this is just a great time. This was a lot of fun. And then he's on a battlefield throwing grenades. Sorry, I don't have any sympathy for a guy like that. And the fact that the U.S. Marines saved his life, he would have bled out had they not got to him and saved his life. And this is how he repays that act, is to laugh at us, and we pay him $10.5 million. No, I'm sorry.
Now, what was the $10.5 million for?
Because
maybe we should, just tell people what that was all about.
That was a reparation paid to him by Justin Trudeau, and it was an I'm sorry check. I'm paraphrasing a lot because I don't have.
I understand. I'm just wondering. I'm just wondering if you could say what it was for, because a lot of people are going, what's that $10 million? I think the issue was whether or not the Canadian government had treated him badly by not bringing him back to Canada or by facilitating his ending up. He was in Guantanamo
yes.
Bay for a while, correct?
And you know what you can't find out about him while he was in Guantanamo? How much he weighed when he came out. How badly he was treated. Look, when people are treated badly in prison, they come out skinnier than when they went in. And yet you cannot find out what his weight was when he left. He didn't look like no walking skeleton to me. He looked like he was very well fed. I don't think they missed. Now, okay, torture could take a lot of different turns, but I don't think they mistreated him nearly as badly. Certainly not worth $10.5 million. And the government of Canada had no responsibility to take him back. The Americans asked us to, and then we said, oh, yes, send the poor child home, you evil Americans. I just said, let him rot. Or if we do bring him home, have the RCMP meet him with an orange jumpsuit and the latest in prisoner wristwear and cart him off to maximum security, slam the door shut, and throw the key away. See, the thing is, we can't deport him because he's a natural-born Canadian. So we can't deport him. We're stuck with the guy. But that doesn't mean that we have to put up with him walking on the streets, gloating at us every time he walks down the street.
Well, I guess apparently you do now, Nick.
And they wonder why I have a hard time keeping my anger in check sometimes.
Okay, we have to go for a break. We're heading into the home stretch in about 2 minutes. So we will catch you guys on the other side here in the Combat Zone on thinkradio.ca. Okay, we are back, and that's a little bit of mellow music. And the only reason I jumped in there is because I accidentally turned my mute button off, and we were just talking about who's doing the introduction back into the Combat Zone. And I was going to say it was Nick, and just as I was about to say that, I accidentally leaned on the button, and there it was. Okay, yes, you are back in the Combat Zone. I'm Nick, he's Joe. No, I'm Joe, he's Nick.
Did you get that backwards?
I got it backwards. First time.
Yes, because
first time. What can I say? There's a first time for everything, Nick.
Yeah, well, now you can put that in. You can take that out of your bucket list.
Yes,
Do you have a bucket list?
I do not have a bucket list.
You don't have things in life you just got to do at some point?
I don't think of life that way, Nick. I just don't think about things that way.
I've got a few things. Getting my pilot's license is one. Going up into the high north, fishing for brook trout's another one. You know, most of them are wrapped around those kinds of things. I'm not the kind of guy that wants to go to Tahiti and spend a week on a beach. I don't have the body for the swimsuit. Trust me, it'd be ugly. It's just not. I look like a pear with sticks. So that's not.
We're not going there, Nick.
No, but I would love.
We don't need the image, Nick.
No.
Our listeners do not need to be there. Okay, imagining what it is that you look like in your swimsuit.
That's as close of a description as I'm going to give. But to go to New Zealand and fish for rainbow trout with a fly rod, Chile. I'd love to go to Chile. We did some work for the embassy there here in Ottawa, and I got to know some of the Chilean staff there, including the ambassador, a really nice guy. And it's funny how there's a lot of similarities between Chile and Canada. They have a much more moderate, they're like BC, a much more moderate climate, but they've got some amazing rainbow trout and sea run trout fishing, as well as some Atlantic salmon fishing down there. And you notice there's a theme to all this, right? All the different things
Chile?
they do.
Chile. No, I get it. So you asked if I noticed there was a theme, and I thought, yeah, I'd have noticed. It's spice.
No.
No? Travel?
It has to do with fishing, yes.
Oh, okay, fishing.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
That's.
I got it. Yeah, Nick's a fisherman.
I would love to fly with the snowbirds.
Right.
Yep. That would be a blast.
I had a couple of friends that flew with the snowbirds.
I got a chance to fly with Mike Potter about 10, 12 years ago. I had when I was still on terrestrial radio.
Tell our listeners who Mike Potter is.
Mike Potter owns Vintage Wings out in Gatineau. He's a very, very well-to-do man, a great guy.
That's near Ottawa, guys.
Yes, that's just the other side of the river. I think he was the founder of Cogeco. Anyway, big tech company, whatever. I can't remember quite the name of it. It's the Vintage Wings is still there, but they're scaling back. He's getting a little older now. He's probably in his mid-70s. But I got a call from a public affairs officer I knew with the military, and she said to me, would you like to go flying in a Harvard? Now, for those of you who don't know what a Harvard is, it's a World War II trainer that the pilots of the British Air Commonwealth Training Program would fly just before they stepped into Spitfires and Hurricanes. And believe me, I know all about the Harvard. I said, would I ever? So she said, why don't you come on out to Vintage Wings? So I went out there. And if you've never been there, to walk through their hangar is, if you're an airplane nut, it's like heaven. I had to literally, when I walked into the hangar, twist and bend my body to get between the wingtips of the two most famous World War II aircraft there are, a Mark 14 Spitfire and a P-51D. And when Mr. Potter reconditions an airplane, he takes them and dips them in liquid glass. That's what they look like. He was redoing a ferry swordfish, the kind that attacked the Bismarck. Every airplane he has is dedicated to a veteran. He has an F-4U Corsair, like you remember the Black Sheep Squadron, those planes. The one he has flew in 22 episodes. This is way back in the days before there was CG. So this one was made by Vogt, not or Goodyear, not Vogt. Anyway, made under license. So he has that there. There's a whole host. I'm not going to run down the whole list. Anyway, I got to meet this short little skinny guy, and he said, "I'm Mike. I'm your pilot. I'll be your pilot today. This is what we're going to do." And he took me inside room, showed me what we were going to do in the airplane. He says, "Now, if at any time you don't feel comfortable, if you start to feel sick or whatever, nobody gets sick when they fly with me." I said, "Oh, don't you worry." And he went up with it. We strapped us in, and he went up, turned that plane inside out. We had a ball. He foolishly let me fly it for a few minutes, and then took it back, landed. And as I'm walking away, my wife said to me, "You should check out who your pilot was." And I said, "Well, some nice guy called Mike." He says, "No, that was Mike Potter." And she told me who he was. I just about fell over. But what a riot. So I can tick that one off, the Fly Warbird. I can tick that one off my list. But boy, I'll tell you, that was a treat. So if you're into airplanes at all, if you want to get an idea of what it's like to leave Earth and do some things you never thought possible, that's the way to do it. It was a blast. Anyway, so yeah, I was just curious if you had anything on your bucket list.
I don't have a bucket list, Nick. I enjoy my life. I think we're all getting older, so maybe slowing down a little bit. But I like what I do. I'm involved, as you know, in political communications and marketing and campaigning, etc. So it's sort of feast or famine in our business. We do some public relations as well, public speaking training, media training. I've never actually said this on the air, but our company is Digitally Public Affairs, and we're of course one of the advertisers on thinkradio.ca. But it's interesting, and but anyway, this isn't about what we do professionally, whatever. The point I'm making here is that I have an interesting life, and I don't feel unfulfilled by any stretch of the imagination, and so I'm not one of those people that has a bucket list of things that I must do before I can't do them anymore. I've never really thought about it one way or the other.
See, I don't look at it as unfulfilled. I just like to challenge myself with different things. Like, I know that you were at one time a pilot. I've got a friend of mine who is he's out west now teaching in a parochial school, and he wouldn't tell you this, but he's a scuba diver up to the instructor level,
right.
Pilot. He has his master's in theology. He's he just runs down somebody ran down the list of his qualifications. I just had no idea.
Yeah, I've done a lot. I've done a lot of those kinds of things, and I haven't really done them in a planned sense. And I just, I haven't thought about it and go, okay, what do I want to do now? But diving, theological training. You're right. I flew power aircraft, flew gliders for a number of years as well. Stopped because I had some medical issues that prevented me from continuing along that path. But diving. I did a lot of scuba diving. Don't do it much these days. I'm not really in a good enough physical condition because of that. And I guess if I had something on my bucket list, gosh, this was not on our subject list at all. But if I had a bucket list, I think I'd like to probably pay a little bit more attention to my physical health and maybe get myself into a bit better condition to be able to do different things. But that's just me.
Well, I think that when people say they have a bucket list, it's a question. It is a something that, at least, let me just speak from my own personal experience. There's a lot of things that you make certain sacrifices in life for the sake of your family, and I don't begrudge them. But there's always been an element of me that's been a little bit of a risk taker. Like, I've been down to Calabogie and driven the high-performance cars down there around the track under the tutelage of an instructor and had a ball doing that. I just like that kind of thing. So to do more of it, or to do a little more in depth, or push that envelope a little bit, is a lot of fun. And there's certain hobbies that I have. Like, I'm a very poor man with very expensive hobbies, and that's one of my big problems. I have a beautiful 1948 Taylorcraft boat at the end of my driveway, 36 feet long, a 36-foot cabin cruiser that's slowly falling apart because I don't have the money to recondition it. I'd love to put that back in the water. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. I don't know. Anyway, Joel asks a very good question. What is the purpose or mission on Think Radio? Well, I'll take a kick at this, and then you can have a shot at it. First of all, Think Radio is designed to give a platform for people who are socially conservative to have a voice, and to allow others to come to a place where they can hear news from an angle other than what the mainstream media presents. And we're always open to new shows, new ideas. This is certainly not just a two-man show as far as, where we want to see it go. But I think, in short, that's probably the best answer I can come up with. It's just a place where you can go and listen to a different point of view than what you get from the mainstream media on a daily basis. Right,
and I think that sums it up pretty good. If people haven't read the, I hate the term mission statement, because I hate mission statements when it comes to businesses or anything, but certainly a pretty clear description of what we're thinking, and that is that that people are not being exposed to different ideas, whether they agree with them or not, whether they like them or not. They're not being exposed to different ideas. So you have this creeping kind of conformity and monolithic thinking on every issue. And the mainstream media really contributes to that in a very serious way. Unlike most people on the right side of the political spectrum, I'm not going to say that they do it purposely. I think, in my experience, it's my experience that a lot of these guys don't really understand what they're doing, because they haven't been exposed to other ideas, other ways of thinking. And so what we want to do is we want to fill that void a little bit. And thinkradio.ca is a platform that we've built to host this kind of show and podcasts like it. So from a small government, libertarian, conservative, even socially conservative point of view. And that's really it. We just want to make these kinds of things, these ideas, available to people, and to give a platform to intelligent, articulate, speaking about being articulate and intelligent, people to be able to espouse these ideas and to defend them. So, as you can see, we do these live shows. People don't have to do a live show, but they could do a live show. We could be doing live shows every single day for 3 or 4 or 5 hours. If, you could build up your listenership and have people actually calling in. We don't have lots of people call in. They do from time to time. We have guests from time to time as well. And, okay, so there it is. We want to be a portal for thinking people, and we want to be unapologetic in our perspective. We don't need to be promoting all perspectives. Our perspective is small c conservative. It's a small government. It's libertarian. We don't all agree on every aspect of public policy. We all have where we're coming from will affect our views on these things. But generally speaking, that's the direction we're coming from. We want to be a counter to the mainstream media. And the way to do it is on the web these days. That's the direction that media is going, including the mainstream media. So, the idea of doing a terrestrial radio, sure, we've talked about ways to market our shows on terrestrial radio, and it'd be interesting to see whether or not we actually some of that bears fruit. And, I'd take the gig if it was offered, as I know you would also, Nick. But the way to go today, as the media environment evolves, is internet. It's online.
There's no doubt about that, and I think that one of the other aspects is when we present arguments and debate them. If someone were to call in and take an opposing view, the one thing that we try not to do, there's one thing, is nothing wrong with being passionate, but to slam dunk somebody just because they oppose you, I think, is a mistake. Because if you slam dunk somebody, say, "Oh, you're just a liberal," or you're the problem," blah blah blah. You know, there was a time that worked. I'm guilty of doing that myself on occasion during my terrestrial career. But most of the time, I would try to engage that person in a conversation so that we could learn from each other. Because nobody has the corner on the truth. We all have what we think the truth is. I like to believe in objective truth, and that I try to adhere to that as much as possible. But that's not everybody's point of view. So, in other words, you have to listen at least as much as you talk so that you can understand where they're coming from. Then you can have a meaningful debate. And Jordan Peterson's great at this. When you watch him, somebody will ask him a question. He doesn't have a prepared answer halfway through their question, even though he's probably heard it before by now. So he'll pause. Sometimes it seems like a long 15-second pause, and he'll just think through and then come up with an answer based on that individual's question. The best person I've ever heard or seen do that was Pope John Paul. He would take the time to answer a question so thoroughly that in the process he would answer 2 or 3 questions before the guy ever knew they were questions. But it was the whole key to it was to listen to the other person. Don't just shout them down. Now, if they become belligerent, if they become argumentative, and all it's doing is just making things miserable, then yeah, you can slam them. You know, we have the hammer. You can bring it down and end the conversation. But for the most part, I think that's counterproductive. And yes, Joel, we would be more than happy to have a libertarian show if that's what you wanted to do. I'm just looking at his comment. There is one more topic I wanted to touch on in the last couple of minutes of the show here, and that is this whole thing with Randy Hillier. Now, look, we've talked about him before. There's been more conversation about him this week in the press, and the thing about this, if it wasn't for SNC, this would be center stage, I think, in every paper in Ontario. It's been bumped off the front pages because of what's going on here in Ottawa, and that may be a good thing, and may be a bad thing. But Randy Hillier is saying that the party that you see in Ontario leading the province at the moment is not the party you think it is, and that there's some pretty nasty stuff going on.
Referring to the Progressive Conservative Party.
Yes, I am. And he's saying that there's a couple of individuals, Dean French and Jim Froggett. Have I got the name
Chris Froggett.
Okay.
Well, it's not just him. There have been media stories around this as well.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But the point is that he's saying that these are the guys that are running the province, and they're creating a culture of fear and intimidation within the caucus. That they're trying to control the ministers far too much, like a certain amount of party loyalty is expected. I understand that, and I think Randy does too. And then they're all basically calling Randy a liar. One of the quotes in the story I have up right now is that, you know, he never brought this up in caucus. He's just a liar. I'm sorry. I've known Randy for years. Now, we're not on each other's Christmas card list, but he knows who I am and I know who he is. And I know what his track record is. And no matter what else you think of Randy, he's not a liar. As a matter of fact, it's painfully the other way around.
Right. Yeah, Randy is a little rough around the edges.
That's right.
I've known him for a number of years now. And he's a bit of an acquired taste, and I don't mean that. You know, if Randy's out there listening, man, I'm not criticizing you for it, man. What I like about Randy Hillier is his authenticity. He is the real deal, whatever the real deal is. Okay,
he's it.
He's not interested in putting on airs. He's not interested in wearing a $500 or a $5,000 suit just to prove to people that he's an important person. You know, I've heard in the last couple of months, fascinatingly enough, I have heard a lot of talk about the fact that Randy Hillier wears suspenders.
Yeah, I love it.
I mean, I don't understand why that would enter into anyone's mind as an issue, but okay, Randy Hillier wears suspenders. I mean, lots of people do. But I think that people look at him and they go, yeah, he's a little bit of maybe a little bit of a hillbilly type of person, you know. Look, that's who he is. You know, take it or leave it. One thing that Randy Hillier is not is dishonest.
That's right.
And so this is a very big problem for the premier and the people around the premier, because you know a lot of us don't want to get into this fight. You know, it's the things that we have to do in this province are frankly too big for us to waste our time battling with one another over personality clashes, etc. And in this respect, I think that they're both right and they're both wrong. But I think that if you have to say that there's wrong to be assigned here, I think there's more wrong to be assigned to the Premier's office than there is to Randy Hillier. And it just, for anybody that knows Randy Hillier, this argument that he's a liar or he's exaggerating or he's spinning things to make himself look good, it just doesn't wash. It's not on, because that's manifestly not Randy Hillier. Randy Hillier is one of the straightest shooters in politics that I have ever had the pleasure and, from time to time, the displeasure of having to interact with. Because, you know, he doesn't beat around the bush. He tells you the way he thinks it is. And if you're lucky, you're not in his way when he's telling you. You're not the target of the criticism. But I'd never, in any of the dealings that I've had with Randy Hillier, I never was subjected to criticism, whether it was harsh or jokingly rendered, that was not ultimately deserved. Okay, so he's a straight shooter. He's an honest guy, and just based on that, I'd have to say, you know, it's pretty hard for me to believe that what he's saying is going on. Is not going on.
You hit on something I think is important. We have so many bigger fish to fry. Like, why is this? If the premier is really running the province, instead of, as Randy Hillier is alleging these other two gentlemen are, why doesn't he either fire these two, heavily censure them, let them know that this kind of behavior is unacceptable?
Well, but even, I have to say this, okay? For set aside these guys, Dean French and Chris Froggatt, and all the allegations that have been made against them by Randy and a lot of people in the mainstream press as well. So it's not just Randy saying this stuff. Just set that aside for a second, okay? For me, the issue is not these two guys, okay? For me, the issue is, why in heaven's name would Premier Ford kick Randy Hillier out of caucus? Now, I'm looking at the justification. I'm looking at the accusations, the arguments to explain why this was the right move. And I'm still waiting to hear what he did that was so egregious as to warrant such a drastic step and to create a distraction. And I have to say, you know, when you're a conservative politician, to be successful in this country, you have to build coalitions. And Randy Hillier represents an important constituency within the conservative-minded or conservative-oriented coalition in this province. How powerful that leg of the coalition is, I don't know. I'm not going to make a comment one way or the other, but the libertarians and the small government conservatives in this province play an important role in the conservative coalition, and it is at your own peril that you alienate them, especially when you're alienating social conservatives as well. So, you know, at some point in time, you ask yourself, where are your friends?
The danger becomes if you alienate a large voting bloc within your constituency, and SOCON's most likely everything being equal, are going to vote PC before they vote Liberal.
But that's not what happens, Nick. What happens is they stay home.
No, okay, but you beat me to the punch.
Okay.
But what I was going to say is that if you alienate them, it's not that they, they'll hold their nose and vote. They'll just stay home and watch the hockey game. And that's the danger. For too many years, PC parties of all levels and all stripes, or conservative parties, or those who claim to be, have basically said to the SOCONs and the people who are aligned with them, where else are you going to vote?
Well,
why should we pander to you? We know we got your vote anyway.
Well, it's kind of ironic, okay? What these guys do is they kick out, and I'm not saying that Doug Ford does this, okay? I mean, he's still a young, insofar politics, provincial politics goes, he's a young pup, okay? He hasn't been doing this for 10 or 15 years. So we'll have to see how things go. But I've always found it ironic and paradoxical that these guys go, we represent a big tent party. That's why we have to kick you out of the tent.
Yeah, that makes
okay,
a
and
lot
then
of
we
sense.
have to kick that group out of the tent, and then we have to kick that group out of the tent. And then the question is, how is it that you're a big tent party anymore?
Well, you may have a big tent, but there'll be nobody in it.
Well, this is it. What's the point of having a big tent if you don't have anybody in it?
Okay.
And one last thought, Nick, because I know we're bumping up against our deadline here, or the end of the show. But yeah, you really, I don't know if you appreciate how really important and profound your observation was a few minutes ago when you said, they say, well, we could count on their vote. Good politics, okay, doesn't really reward loyalty. Don't get me wrong, loyalty is important to a certain degree in certain aspects of the political game. But what's really rewarded in the game of politics is disloyalty. The minute they think that they could count on you no matter what they say or do, that's when you lose all of your power. Your power is in the belief that they have to do something to keep you on side. And so that's why I say politics really rewards disloyalty or the threat of disloyalty. So there it is. That's my pearl of wisdom for the evening.
And that is 2 hours in the books.
Where did all of the time go?
I was afraid we didn't have enough topics.
We always have enough topics, Nick. That's
the
way we are.
Having two people instead of one.
Okay, so this was a blast, guys. And tune in next week. Don't forget to tell people about the show. And if you like what you hear, click on the donate button and send us, $5 or $10 or $5,000. Whatever you feel comfortable, we will put to good use. Patronize our advertisers, please, and thank you. And we will catch you next week in the Combat Zone.